The following program is sponsored in part by Customers Bank.
Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Today we'll talk about the governor's economic policies, but first we're joined by Jim Lee, President and CEO of Susquehanna Polling and Research. Welcome to our program, Jim.
Thank you. Good morning, Larry.
You put out a new poll about the race for governor, but first, briefly, tell us about your methodology. Who did you poll and how many responded?
Sure thing, Larry. Well, this poll and these poll questions about the governor's race were sponsored by Latour Live. And what we conduct is a representative sample of 700 likely Pennsylvania voters, primarily by telephone. And that gives us a statewide snapshot that is scientific with a margin of error of 3.7%, which means we have good reliability with the survey results, Larry.
All right, Jim, thanks very much. So let's dive into 4 questions from your poll. And I'm going to paraphrase the first one, which poses the question, if the election for governor were being held today, would you vote for Josh Shapiro, the Democrat, or Stacey Garrity, the Republican? How'd that turn out?
Well, it didn't turn out so well if you're a Stacey Garrity fan. In this particular question, if the race were held on the day we conducted the survey, which was the last 2 weeks of March, Shapiro holds a 58 to 36% lead over Stacey Garrity. That's a 22% lead. That is pretty formidable. And the key for Garrity, if she's going to close the gap, she's going to need the resources to really drive Shapiro's numbers down 9 points between now and election day to get him under 50% to make this a competitive race. The problem right now is in the polling details, Shapiro is getting, Larry, 95%, literally 95% of the Democratic vote. And he's even siphoning off 18% of Republican voters who should be breaking for Garrity. So Shapiro right now has his base solidified and is actually making inroads with Republican voters who aren't convinced yet Garrity is a good alternative to the incumbent.
Well, given that margin between Garrity and Shapiro in the poll, and you said it's 22%, and Jim, of course, you've done a number of polls in the past, just how significant is that margin at this stage of the campaign?
Larry, it's pretty significant. 4 years ago, Doug Mastriano was the Republican nominee. He lost to Shapiro by 16 percentage points. And that's a problem because that means that Mastriano, like Garrity in the current poll, didn't do enough to really convince swing voters and soft Democrats to give them a reason to vote for the Republican. So Garrity has her work cut out for her. There are crystal clear differences between these two. She needs an aggressive, hard comparison campaign with the incumbent, but it's going to take resources. And the campaign expense reports show right now she is underwhelming in terms of her financial wealth in this campaign. And Pennsylvania is a very expensive media market.
Jim, let's go on to the second question that has to do with the race for governor. And I'll paraphrase that. For those who would vote for Shapiro, what is your primary reason? And what was the result there, Jim? Try to tell us briefly.
The result was that most people, Shapiro voters, feel he is doing a good job as governor. And they feel that he's getting things done for the Commonwealth. And that's an important distinction because when voters look at the race for governor, they tend to view the governor as a CEO, not like a statesman in the United States Senate, but more of a CEO who's managing the state like the state should be run like a business. And they believe Shapiro has been an effective governor. And that's an important thing for the governor because his message all along has been, we will get stuff done for Pennsylvanians. And many Shapiro voters believe he's done just that.
Jim, let's go on to poll question number 3. For those who would vote for Stacey Garrity, what is the primary reason they gave?
Primarily 2 factors that really are attributed to her strength right now. One, many people believe in her economic message to reduce and rein in the amount of state spending and taxation in Harrisburg, and also the fact that she's the Republican alternative to Shapiro is important because Republicans in the state legislature and in the governor's race in particular stand fundamentally for very different things than Democrats stand for. So the fact that Stacey Garrity is drawing support, particularly because she's a strong Republican nominee, was one of the reasons people gave in that selection of choices.
Let's move on to the 4th poll question that we're going to be discussing today, Jim, and I'll paraphrase that. If this is about the undecideds, and if you are undecided on the governor's race, how are you leaning? I guess leaning is an important word that you used in your poll.
Yes, and it's important to understand that undecided voters in this poll primarily consist of independent voters, Larry, and Republicans that are undecided because, as I said earlier, Shapiro has a lock on literally 95% of the Democratic voters based on the polling. So there's no undecided Democrats. It's all Republicans and independents. They need to be breaking and considering Garrity if she's going to tighten the race. The problem is, in the current poll, undecided voters look like they're breaking slightly more for Shapiro than they are for Garrity. And that's a problem because Garrity is the one right now who needs to show positive growth. Mm-hmm. And if she's going to get back those Republicans that are currently voting for Shapiro, she's going to need these undecided Republicans to come home by the time Election Day rolls around. She can do that, but it's going to take money, it's going to take a strong message, and it's going to take her to really hit Shapiro head on with the key issues that Republicans feel this governor's race is all about.
Now, according to your poll, Jim, 53% then of the voters that you polled are still not decided in this race. Now, the general election, of course, is in November. When do undecideds tend to come down off of the fence?
Anywhere in the last 2 to 4 weeks before Election Day. After Labor Day, Larry, in September, people will start to tune into the race a little more, but the real undecided voters typically don't make up their minds until the last 2 to 4 weeks before Election Day, when they'll really start paying attention.
Jim Lee from Susquehanna Polling and Research, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Larry. Nice to be with you today.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after a short break.
Want to know what's new on your favorite PCN series? Looking to stay up to date with state leadership and government activities? Subscribe to PCN's newsletters and stay informed about everything Pennsylvania. Get exclusive previews, behind-the-scenes insights, and can't-miss recommendations delivered straight to your inbox. Choose the information that's important to you. It's free, it's easy, and it's just a click away. Sign up for your all-access pass to everything Pennsylvania. Visit PCNTV.com to sign up today.
Watch new episodes of PCN's Politics and Policy programs. The PCN Capitol Preview, live Mondays and Tuesdays, gets you ready for the week ahead in the state legislature. Wednesdays, On the Issues, takes an in-depth look at politics and policy with candidates and lawmakers. Thursdays, Journalists Roundtable brings together Pennsylvania reporters to recap the week's top stories. Watch on cable or stream with PCN Select. PCN is Pennsylvania Politics and Policy.
Our guests today are Bernie Gallagher, Executive Director of the Keystone Research Center, and Megan Martin, Chief Operating Officer and General Counsel for the Commonwealth Foundation. Welcome to our program. Megan, we're going to start with you. Your group says the governor's budget is reckless and unaffordable. So tell us, how did you reach that conclusion?
Good morning, Larry. Thank you for having me here today. And what I would say is that Governor Shapiro, yes, he has introduced again another unaffordable, non-starter budget. The budget he proposed is $53.26 billion, which is a 6.3% increase over last year's budget. And his budget recklessly spends taxpayer dollars, it worsens Pennsylvania's structural deficit, and it fails to address key issues that are important to our organization, such as expanding educational opportunities, especially for all those kids that are trapped in our failing schools. And the governor's budget proposal, unfortunately, is going to result in tax hikes on working families. It's going to increase our structural deficit and tap into our rainy day fund, our emergency funds, and it's going to make Pennsylvania less competitive in terms of growth and opportunity. And because of that, we would like to see lawmakers, again, reject the governor's budget proposal, and instead, we would like to see the lawmakers focus on reining in their spending. We would like to see them address the structural deficit. We would like to see them protect families from tax hikes. We would like to see lawmakers adopt policies that are going to make Pennsylvania a competitive state for opportunity and prosperity.
Megan, I try to make it a policy when our guest first mentions the structural deficit. That means the responsibility is yours to try to define it for our audience in simple terms.
I'm happy to do that for you, Larry. So when the budget was passed last year, that budget, they spent more money than they had. And so last year's budget resulted in a structural deficit of $4.6 billion. So that's a hole in our budget. And what that means that when you look at this year's proposal that the governor has proposed, he's added another almost $2 billion to that. So it's going to raise that structural deficit to $6.8 billion. And the IFO has told us that their analysis of the structural deficit is that next year the structural deficit is going to be at least $6 billion, and that's due to excessive overspending. And let me explain. So the IFO projects that in the next 5 years, we're going to have $5.3 billion in revenue growth, but that spending is going to increase by $8.9 billion. And so that you can just see on the scale, that is completely out of alignment. And that what is going to happen is taxpayers are going to be faced with tax hikes. At Commonwealth Foundation, we've done the analysis, and the governor's budget as proposed is going to result next year in a tax hike of $2,100 for the average family of four. And Pennsylvanians can't afford that kind of budget, Larry.
Bernie, how do you see this budget? Megan obviously has some strong opinions.
Yeah, I see it very differently. I see it very much as a pro-worker budget that invests in K-12 education. It also invests in healthcare, which is largely out of the governor's hands. If you look at how the dollars are allocated in the governor's budget, almost all the new dollars are going into Medicaid, which services 1 in 4 Pennsylvania households, and K-12 education. And the allocation is meant to meet a constitutional requirement that was put in place. And so the governor is simply following the playbook of meeting people's healthcare needs as well as educational needs. In many ways, the governor is investing in people and in the state's potential. And so he is using dollars from the rainy day fund to do so. And the reason why, I'm sure that if I were in his shoes, I wouldn't want to either. But I think it's because Pennsylvania has an upside down tax system where people who earn the less pay the most as a proportion of their income than the wealthy. And so in many ways, if we had our druthers and we could wave a magic wand, we would say, let's fix that first. Let's get the dollars to match our expenditures, which is really healthcare. So if you look at the state budget, 90% of it breaks down like this. So 60% goes into healthcare, 20% goes into K-12, and 10% goes into public safety. And I would say Pennsylvanians would prioritize all three. And so the governor is really just applying what the people want. Ideally, we'd like to get the revenues coming in. He's put some proposals on the table, of which we can discuss later. However, it's really up to the General Assembly to start thinking about solutions. He's put out a proposal, and it's time to have that debate and arrive at a solution so that our services continue and people can continue to contribute to the economy.
Well, Bernie, help us tighten our focus on the Republicans' perspective of the governor's new budget proposal. They say that the spending would be more than 6% over the last budget. How do you feel about that characterization? Is that about right? And how do you justify such an increase?
Well, I don't know if he's justifying it. I think when you look at the state government, it's in the middle. There's the federal government. So if you look at the total state budget, nearly half of all spending comes from the federal government. So if you start seeing chaos and uncertainty at the federal level, it will only percolate down. The governor is trying to mitigate that with state funds, using the rainy day fund. There was a bill that was passed, the One Big Beautiful Bill. It created a number of new changes to Medicaid, which is for the state, if the state spends 60 cents of every dollar on health care. So any change at the federal level will impact 60% of the state budget. And that is the case. And what the governor is doing is accommodating for those changes, which will reduce benefits for 1 in 4 Pennsylvanians, and such is trying to find ways to keep those services so that kids can get health care and people can stay healthy so that they can go to work. And so those are some of the things that I think he's navigating, and I'm sure he'd wish he didn't have to navigate, but has to.
Larry, I would love to address
Please
the rainy day fund first, if I may. So for your viewers who are not familiar with the rainy day fund, Pennsylvania has an emergency savings account. You know, my husband and I, our family has one. I'm sure you do. I'm sure many of your listeners do. You have an emergency savings account, for example, if your car breaks down, to fix your car, or if you need a new appliance in your home. I would analogize that to the rainy day fund. So Pennsylvania has this rainy day fund. It was created almost 100 years ago in statute, and the rainy day fund is very clear. And there are only 2 circumstances under which funds may be taken out from the rainy day fund. The first is if there's an emergency that impacts the health, safety, or welfare of the people of Pennsylvania. And the second is if there is a downturn in the economy that's unexpected, think recession. And I would argue that we have neither of those situations here. I would further argue that it is a very high bar set forth in the law for when you tap into the rainy day fund, because it is for moments when there is a problem, God forbid, like a recession, like an emergency. I would tell you that even during COVID, there was no tapping into the rainy day fund. So it's a very high bar, and not only is it a high bar with the criteria that must be met, but also with the action taken by the General Assembly to get it approved. It has to be a 2/3 vote, not only in the State House of Representatives, but also in the state Senate. And so it's a very high bar to preserve this fiscal safety net for the people of Pennsylvania. And what I would say is it's not permitted to be used for just ordinary spending like the governor wants it to be used for. And government needs to learn to live within its means, Larry. You know, I'm a huge proponent, my organization is a huge proponent of fiscal responsibility and fiscal accountability. And I have to live within my budget, and so do you. And so we want the government to do the same thing. And once these funds are drained, then the taxpayers are going to be left holding the bags. The taxpayers are going to have to cash that check that the governor wrote. And it's never good fiscal policy to pay for expenses with a one-time fix like something like the rainy day fund. And then God forbid we do have an actual recession or an emergency, those funds will not be there to protect the taxpayers.
Bernie.
I just want to react. You just can't build a competitive economy by starving the very systems that support the workforce and the consumers. So when I heard just kind of the mapping out of the uses for the rainy day fund, the very first thing that was mentioned was health. And seeing the changes at the federal government that's reducing or creating enormous amounts of friction such that the effect is removing people from getting benefits, that affects their health, affects their ability to get to work, I think that triggers the first gate of saying, yes, you can use the rainy day fund for such a thing. I'd also go further to say that the friction that's being created at the federal government is reducing food benefits for there's 2 million Pennsylvanians that receive supplemental food nutrition benefits on a monthly basis. It's known as SNAP. And the big, beautiful bill is estimated to increase that by 60,000 people. That's 60,000 people that will not receive the nutrition. Now, that bill also, that one big, beautiful bill, it also cut benefits or money that go to food banks. And that's the next stop for people to go to when they are not receiving their food benefits. When you're cutting both of those levers, using the rainy day fund seems like an appropriate use because those people are having a rainy day.
Well, Bernie, I'd like you to react to something Megan said just a couple minutes ago. She said that the governor didn't dip into the rainy day fund even during the COVID crisis. And so that seemed to be an extremely high bar. And even under those circumstances, no money was taken from it.
Revenues were received by the state.
Yes,
that were passed
but not
through.
taken from rainy day fund. Megan, that was your point, right?
Correct.
Well, the rainy day fund mostly accumulated in the post-pandemic effect of the economy running up. So the surplus was generated as a result of that. The money that was coming through from the feds were going straight to the beneficiaries, right? So as the economy rallied, money was then put into the rainy day fund. We are now drawing on those dollars because we are, in fact, having a rainy day. Many people are. I personally am not. I'm a very lucky person. But there are many, many Pennsylvanians who are having a very difficult time paying their bills. I just, looking at AAA gas, it's up 21% from a year ago, all because of some arbitrary action that's happening at the federal level. So what we're seeing is that trickle-down effect of decision-making at one level of government goes down to the next and to the next. And what we're seeing now is that the governor is putting in place a buffer such that that kind of chaos doesn't trickle down to municipalities and beyond.
I would love to respond if I may. I respectfully disagree with my colleague sitting here at the desk with me, Larry. When it comes to Medicaid, he is correct. It consumes about 1/3 of Pennsylvania's budget. It is significant. And between 2018 and 2025 rather, the Department of Human Services that administers that, their budget grew by 58%, while Pennsylvania's population, according to census data, only grew by 2%. And so that kind of growth is unsustainable for our taxpayers. And I would also say that when you look at what occurred in Minnesota in terms of the Medicaid fraud, taxpayers were defrauded to the tune of at least $9 billion. That should really be a wake-up call here in Pennsylvania, not only for Pennsylvania, but also for all states across the country, that we need to make sure that we are being fiscally responsible and accountable and rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. And what I would say is that the governor's budget includes $1.7 billion, or 8.6% more money for human services, but he doesn't propose any reforms to promote work among healthy childless individuals who are working age adults, or to root out this waste, fraud, and abuse. So, I think that when people hear that the One Big Beautiful Bill put into place, for example, work requirements, some people say that demonstrates a lack of compassion and a lack of humanity. But I would respectfully disagree with that, because these are precious, limited funds that we need to preserve for the folks who truly need it. And if we are not being responsible and making sure that we're doing things like routine eligibility verification, so that the people who should be receiving the benefits are, and those who are not receiving those benefits, that's incumbent upon us to preserve those, like I said, those precious funds for the individuals who definitely, genuinely need it. And we would like to see more of that. We would like to see common sense reforms like that as part of this budget proposal, so that the limited funds that we do have can be made available for the people who need it the most.
When the governor made his budget speech, he renewed his proposal about raising the minimum wage. And Bernie, I just want to start with you in a very basic way. Just how many people would have more money in their pockets if minimum wage is raised?
Yeah, so to that point is we're looking at about close to 1 million people across the state would be affected by the change, right? So there's a lot of stereotypes that surface around who receives the minimum wage and who's impacted by it. I'm going to speak to the facts. Who benefits from the change in the minimum wage? The majority of people who receive a minimum wage are women. The majority, so 80% of those who receive the minimum wage are age 20 or older, and they are adults, and they're typically not living at home. And of those adults, nearly half of their household income is coming from that job, whether it's part-time or whatever. It just shows how critical the minimum wage is to so many people across the Commonwealth. It's very important to say that 1/4 of those people have children. So the minimum wage directly impacts their families, and 55% of those people are working full-time. And so there's a lot of misnomers around it, but what I think is very, very important is that there's also an economic benefit to the communities. Every dollar, every cent that somebody at that level of income gets, they need it, and they apply it directly into the economies around them. So the mom and pop shops, the grocery stores, everywhere, and the velocity of that money is very fast. And what that also does is it trickulates right back to the state to the tune of about $50 million, right back into the state coffers.
Megan, what did you think of that demographics report we just heard?
Sure. I think that minimum wage is definitely an issue where Bernie and I are going to have to agree to disagree, Larry. We believe that the free markets should decide wages. And at Commonwealth Foundation, we work every day to create a more prosperous Pennsylvania. And we think that to bring in more business and to expand business, government needs to get out of the way of business.
And currently minimum wage is $7.25 an hour.
It is.
And a lot of the proposals are hovering in the $15 range.
Correct. And the IFO has put out its analysis and said that currently the market minimum wage in Pennsylvania is $11 to $11.50 an hour, and that less than 1% of all workers in Pennsylvania are making this minimum wage.
Oh, how about that, Bernie? Address that. Let's just try to take on these claims one at a time.
No, it's not 1%. I don't have the specific number, but it's not 1%.
Our data from the IFO shows that it's less than 1% of all workers are making the minimum wage. And what I would say is that we have so many small businesses in Pennsylvania. Small businesses are the lifeblood of the communities all across Pennsylvania. And I guess the lens through which I view it in terms of paying people, I'm never going to be convinced that government is in a better position to know a business's bottom line and how much they can afford to pay their employees. And if these small businesses are forced to pay a higher wage to their employees, the real concern is that they are going to let go some employees because they can only pay a fewer amount of employees. And what we would like to see, instead of the focus on the minimum wage, we would like to see focus on better reduction in the deficit, so that doesn't create a tax increase for folks. We'd like to see, tax policies reformed in Pennsylvania. We would like to see that the lawmakers cut corporate welfare here in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure this is something that we could talk a lot about as well. We need to have a level playing field for government here in Pennsylvania, and we need to create an environment that promotes prosperity and opportunity for all of the people of Pennsylvania. And when you have government out of the way of business, for example, something like the minimum wage, that is one way to do that. And
Bernie, what do you think of Megan's claim about in a situation where minimum wage is raised, that some employees would just simply have to be cut loose because they couldn't be afforded anymore?
I can't speak as a small employer, and I don't know if Megan can as well. I think we can hear anecdotally the things that small employers will say about needing to have consistent service delivered, and paying people appropriately will help with that. I think what's important to note is that it's been 16 years since the minimum wage was put in place, and our surrounding states have adapted to that. We're the last one. And part of that is, and so our organization, we've got a labor economist, and we have 2 researchers with PhDs, and they did a cross-border analysis with New York. And New York has a minimum wage of $15.50. And they were able to show in the hospitality industry, which is a space that has a lot of minimum wage workers, that the amount of economic growth and development in that region is much higher on the New York side than on the Pennsylvania side. And as you know, the northern tier is an area of the state that is suffering economically.
All right, thanks very much. I'm going to give you a break just for a minute while we look at program notes for PCN. Governor Josh Shapiro visits Erie to talk about his new memoir, Where We Keep the Light, Stories from a Life of Service. We'll have that for you tonight, live at 6 p.m. On the Issues continues our series with candidates running for Congress in the May primary. Carol Obando Durstein, a Democrat running in Pennsylvania's District 7, joins us Wednesday at 7 p.m. Then right after that, we'll have Justin Douglas, a Democrat running in District 10 at 7:30 p.m. We have a special college version of Journalist Roundtable this week. Reporters from the Daily Collegian at Penn State, the Pitt News at the University of Pittsburgh, and the Daily Pennsylvanian at the University of Pennsylvania will join us on Thursday at 7 p.m. Now in the history and culture side of things, PCN visits the Venango County Historical Society, courtesy of America 250 PA. That's on this evening at 8 o'clock. The Popular Silence of Sigmund Lubin looks at a filmmaker from Philadelphia who went to extremes to achieve realism during the dawn of cinema. It's part of our America 250 celebration here on PCN, and it's on this evening at 9:30 p.m. You can watch this show and all our public affairs programming free of charge by visiting PCNselect.com. And while you're there, you can download our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. All right, here we are talking about the governor's economic policies, and even though this is a federal policy, this must have an effect on the economy in Pennsylvania. And what I'm talking about is the tariffs. President Trump's tariffs. The first tariff plan was struck down by the courts. Trouble is, a lot of PA businesses have already paid into it. What do? How do they recover that money? Anybody?
Sure, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So there's roughly 1.2 million small businesses in the state, and the average number of employees in each one of those is about 10, right? So it's not super big, but big enough, and there's a lot that small businesses need to navigate. And a lot of what they have to do is they have to deal with inventory. They have to really do the best that they can to figure out how are they going to sell and then cover their expenses, right? And any kind of chaos and uncertainty that is occurring at the federal level is going to triculate and hit them. And so they have to make really tough decisions. They will have to pull back. They may not invest. They might not find ways to grow an economy. They might find ways to just preserve. And so when policies that are being driven at the federal level don't benefit small businesses, I wonder if it's a good policy at all.
Certainly at Commonwealth Foundation, Larry, we're not in favor of tariffs because tariffs are taxes, no matter the nomenclature, no matter what you want to call them. And, what I would say is that, looking at the state budget here in Pennsylvania, we have a concern that the governor's overspending would mean higher taxes here in Pennsylvania. There would be new taxes in the governor's budget as well as tax increases in the governor's budget. For example, the governor has proposed 3 new taxes, combined reporting, so a tax on job creators, the tax on legalization of marijuana.
And review combined reporting for us just briefly.
Sure. It is when, and I'm sure that my esteemed colleague here at the desk will probably do a better job explaining than I will because he is an economist. But when a business does business in multiple states, the Commonwealth wants that to be reported here in Pennsylvania. And what I would say is I don't know that there's ever been evidence of fraud for purposes of combined reporting. But what I do know is that it is a tax on job creators, and it creates a lot of regulatory burden and expense on job creators. And if the governor talks about making Pennsylvania open for business, we also at Commonwealth Foundation want to see Pennsylvania open for business, and we question, we don't think that that's a good way to do it. There's also the proposed tax on skills games, a proposed tax on legalization of marijuana, and just generally speaking, those are issues that the General Assembly has not really expressed an appetite. There's been a lot of controversy, and so, again, I come back to government living within its means and being fiscally responsible, and the governor has built his budget on $1.9 billion of revenue from those sources that, number one, is not there, and that the IFO says is only $476 million, so there's a $1.5 billion gap. So in terms of taxes on business, whether they're small or large, we see that there are new taxes in the budget, and then there's tax increases. If the budget, as proposed, was passed, it would result in $2,100 of taxes on an average Pennsylvania family, not to mention the governor's biggest tax of all on the energy policies that he is putting forth and his energy proposal. And those taxes, Pacer Press, the carbon tax, and what we have seen in Pennsylvania is an energy powerhouse. We are the #1 energy producer and the number 2 producer and the #1 electricity exporter in the country. So that is remarkable. And we have seen in Pennsylvania, we know how to increase our generation while decreasing our carbon footprint. And we did that without having to have the carbon taxes in place. And moreover, part of that tax involves mandating what I would say are more expensive and unreliable sources of energy. So these are taxes, again, if we want to make Pennsylvania open for business, it's a holistic approach. And so we would like to see those kind of taxes not get enacted and better policies put in place.
You mentioned skill games a minute ago. We're going to explore that soon. But Bernie, I know you want to react to that.
Yeah, sure. First, I'm not an economist. People wear that label with pride. I'm not. I'm a experienced budget analyst, is maybe a way to put it. What I want to react to is that combined reporting is common sense. So when businesses come to Pennsylvania, they come for a multitude of reasons, one of which is our workforce. It's one of the best in the country. And then they couple it with energy demand. So their businesses require energy, and so they settle here because of the points made by Megan about having the ability to provide that energy. Which right now is going through a very tumultuous period, trying to figure out, given the on-ramping of data centers and all the other demands for energy, Pennsylvania is able to deliver. So businesses want to be here. What combined reporting does is, so I should back this up, 75% of corporations have no tax liability at all. Why? Because they are able to put assets, even though they can operate here and enjoy the benefits of what I just talked about, the workforce, the energy, the quality of life that Pennsylvania delivers, they're able to put their assets in other states, like Delaware, that has no corporate tax liability. What we're saying is if you want to operate and have the quality of life and all the other benefits that Pennsylvania offers you, you should pay for the state services that support it. Right? So combined reporting does that. There's 2 types of combined reporting, though. One is water's edge. It's just a term that says right at the edge of the state. So like says if you operate, whatever you operate inside Pennsylvania, we tax that. There's worldwide combined reporting that says is anywhere you do business, we tax that, right? So the thing that is being offered here is water's edge. It's not the big plan. And what it is just saying you operate here, you pay here. So I think that's a common sense solution. With respect to the other revenue sources, again, I have to agree. The General Assembly should weigh in. However,
How about the potential of skill games, Bernie? Sorry, our time is limited.
Of course, yeah. Okay, I could go on.
Skill games are found in social clubs, and they resemble slot machines. They're not regulated. There appears to be a consensus among lawmakers that they should be regulated, but it sounds like the discussion stops there.
So I can't speak on behalf of a decision maker sitting in a seat that casts a vote. But what I will say is that there's still some work that needs to be done on the various iterations of legislation that's out there that creates parity among all the entities that could stand to benefit. And right now, there's still some disjointed elements of the proposals out there that would favor some entities over others. And that's probably where some of the stickiness is.
I would agree with Bernie's statement. I do think that the stickiness is how much. You have the spectrum, I think, of some who don't want any taxes at all and some who want the governor's level of tax, which I believe is 54%, if I'm not mistaken. So
52 or 54.
Yes, so somewhere along that spectrum. And again, this is going to be up to the lawmakers. You know, I had the privilege of overseeing 11 budgets at the Senate when I was a parliamentarian, and this is going to be another one of those issues where they're going to have to roll up their sleeves and see if they can reach a consensus or not.
Now, let's talk about public transportation, and let's review the situation that happened last year. The governor arranged a temporary funding solution for SEPTA, which is the mass transit agency in Philadelphia. However, that's a temporary solution. So what's he proposing this year for public transportation? And certainly that's got to have an impact on doing business in Pennsylvania.
Sure. The governor has proposed an additional 1.7% of sales and use tax revenue, which is the equivalent to just under $320 million, to bail out what I would say is the failing systems.
So that's take money from an existing source.
So, yes, from the sales and use tax revenue. And so what we do know, Larry, is that Pennsylvanians already pay $2.47 billion into transit here in Pennsylvania. And I think the frustration for me, and certainly for my organization, and maybe for a lot of Pennsylvanians, is we can't keep bailing out failing systems. SEPTA has to help themselves. The Lord helps those who help themselves. And my goodness, they have to be accountable and help themselves. And we would like to see if there are going to be financial sources from the state applied to SEPTA. It should be to the really low-income riders who need it the most. And then otherwise, we would like to see SEPTA take accountability and look at their routes. I know that as of last year, they hadn't examined their routes in 60 years. And so they need to look at their routes and their fares, and they need to manage their business better rather than always coming back to the taxpayers. I always go back to the government has to live within its means, and the taxpayers can't afford all of these extra taxes.
And prospective passengers don't want to hear about raising fares either, however.
They don't, but they are the users. And so, you know, I think there's a fairness argument. Again, when it comes back to taxpayers, when you look at the users who are real low-income riders who could use the support, to me that's a different story than it is just continually bailing out failing systems.
What do you think of that, Bernie? And sometimes just the phrase bailout has a triggering effect, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was going to react to that. It's not a bailout. So SEPTA has an incredibly large array of investments, capital investments that, as anybody who owns a car, they deteriorate over time. They've got rolling stock. But what's interesting about SEPTA is they've got carousel houses, they have bridges, and that's not necessarily because they want it. It's because the state forced it to have it through a statute. So now they have to maintain it, they have to keep it safe, and it's incredibly expensive, and it's not covered by the budget that PennDOT operates from the Motor License Fund. So they have to find the money somewhere, right? Over on the other side of the state, there's the Port Authority. They've got rolling stock. They don't have as much capital investment as SEPTA. They didn't get the roads and bridges hoisted onto them at some point in time, but they still have incredible operating costs. But what's missing in all of this is that transportation is a total system thing. It's not just roads, bridges, and then public transportation. They're all one thing. They get people where they need to go. They keep the economy running, so to speak. And so a part of what's being done here is trying to figure out some way to stopgap this, but really ultimately there needs to be a comprehensive fix to how transportation is funded in this state. And also, all this money is not going to SEPTA. All this money is not going to the Port Authority. It's coming to where I live in rural Pennsylvania. It's going to other communities in rural Pennsylvania. It's not just a SEPTA thing. It's not a Port Authority thing. It is an entire Pennsylvania thing.
Let's talk about higher education funding and what's in the governor's budget proposal that would benefit the state-relateds. And there seems to be a trend in recent years for state commitment of funding to go down.
I'm happy to react. This is an area of the budget I wish was better addressed. It has nothing to do with the governor. It could be any administration. The state of our higher education system is in woeful disrepair. We are ranked 49th per capita spend on higher education. I don't know what that communicates to the business community, but it's definitely a big red flag. And it's a space that we need to address. And there are proposals out there to find a way to get more of our local native young students to stay in Pennsylvania and to support our higher educational system. And that's something we can talk about, of course. It's called the PA Promise. It just says, hey, after every dollar that has been offered up by the federal government, by any other lending entity, the state will cover the rest, right? And many times it's not that much. In some cases for families that come from very modest means, it's more, right? And that makes sense. And so what that does is it keeps that brain trust in our state, which is having a demographic decline. We need these humans here and living their lives and enjoying the quality of life that Pennsylvania offers. But we also have to offer them some sort of way to get to that higher level, to get that higher paying job so that they can have a family sustaining income.
I would agree with Bernie, Larry, that people are leaving Pennsylvania for other states, and it's quite alarming. And I have a lot of data here. Since 2022 alone, Pennsylvania has lost net more than 54,000 residents to other states through interstate migration. And what we have learned is that most of these folks are moving to low tax, low regulatory states, Florida, Texas, South Carolina. Last year, more people moved out of Pennsylvania than moved in, making Pennsylvania the fourth year in a row for this outward migration. And it gets worse. From 2012 to 22, Pennsylvania lost more than 180,000 residents, and those individuals took $16.5 billion in personal income with them to other states. And as a result of this, these trends, Pennsylvania has lost 4 congressional seats in the last reapportionments, and we're on target to potentially lose another one in 2030. So, we do need to address this issue of folks leaving Pennsylvania, brain drain our workforce. Again, if we want Pennsylvania to be open for business, we want people to want to stay here in our great Commonwealth. And Commonwealth Foundation recently did some polling, and our polling revealed that 38% of Pennsylvanians have considered moving to another state, or they know somebody who has, for a better job. And so that is really alarming, and for a better tax climate. So those are real legitimate concerns, and the governor's budget address doesn't address those issues, and we think that those are issues that need to be addressed in the governor's budget.
Bernie, what do you think of some of these statistics?
I know it's an academic debate because the outward migration is definitely something that is being fought over by economists with credentials, right? However, what I can speak to—
You mean there's disagreement as to how many people are leaving Pennsylvania?
Yeah, and why they're doing it, right?
Why is important?
Because a lot, just a counter argument to folks going to other states that appear to be low tax, they get down there and there's no housing and there's no jobs, right? They're going down with the optimism of finding an opportunity, and then they're finding that it's not so great.
But that's because they leave Pennsylvania because they don't feel there's an opportunity here.
But back to the higher ed point is, I think that's where this all started.
Yeah, it did.
We need to invest in higher ed so that there's a pathway for people to stay in state, right, and not seek higher ed opportunities that are better subsidized by those other states, such as New York, which has an Excelsior program, which is a very attractive program. You go get there, move to New York, get residency, and then you get higher ed paid for. That is an incentive that young people are definitely cued into. And I don't want to lose any more young people. We need to keep them here.
And before we finish the topic of higher ed funding, I just want to make one more point that the governor's proposing what's being called performance-based funding for the state-related schools. I wonder what kind of detail is involved there. Can either of you help me?
I don't know the specifics, Larry, with regard to performance-based budgeting for the higher eds, but I think that performance-based budgeting as a general premise is a good thing, because I think that it fosters accountability, it fosters trust of the people in our government that fiscally responsible decisions are being made, because you are looking at how the taxpayer dollars are being spent. Are they being spent wisely? Are they delivering on the things that they said they are going to deliver on? And I think that you can't talk about higher education without also talking about K-12 education here in Pennsylvania. And our education system is funded. The governor has proposed another $923 million this year, which is a 5.2% increase to support our public schools. And what we would like to see is also the support for educational opportunities for all children in Pennsylvania. And what the governor has done, unfortunately, in this budget, has cut school choice, and there are hundreds of thousands of students in Pennsylvania who are trapped in failing schools. So I am the product of, my father was the son of Italian immigrants, and he told me that his education was his ticket out of poverty. And that is something that has stayed with me my whole life. It has made fighting for education choice for me very personal. And so when I see these children that are trapped in failing schools and don't have a way out, don't have a lifeline out, you know, I'm very passionate, and so, as is my organization and my colleagues, about finding ways to help these children, because I do believe that education is the pathway to opportunity and prosperity. And the governor promised the children of Pennsylvania when he was a candidate that he was going to deliver on that, and he was going to expand educational opportunities for them, but he didn't deliver on that promise. And so we would like to see that readdressed in this budget as well.
The governor has certainly put his money where his mouth is. I mean, he's contributed close to $1.5 billion more into K-12 education since coming into office.
$500 million increase last year,
Yes.
$500 million increase proposed for this year, right?
Correct. And so to that point is that it's hard to hear that the current educational system as is in any way like needs anything less than more money. It just does, in order to fuel the economy of the future, to be an investment and a pipeline for prosperity for so many people. Also, there's an issue with school choice. I mean, regrettably, the credentialing and the academic rigor that a lot of the choices that are offered to the public school system don't pass muster. So there's a lot of pause that needs to be made before any allocation outside the public school system as to whether that's a good use of public money.
Of course, Larry, I would respectfully disagree with that. I would say that, you know, public school funding keeps going up and up and up at a time when public school enrollment is in decline and when our proficiency rates of our children are also in decline. They've been steadily declining for the last decade, and right now about 70% of Pennsylvania's 8th graders are proficient in math and reading, and are not proficient in math and reading. And so something is not working. And so, you know, we want to see educational opportunities for all the children. And I would say the governor, one point that he has made in talking about his budget is that it's not going to result in tax increases because for the next 4 years, he's not going to increase public school funding. And I just don't see how that is possible. I think that is a hope, perhaps, of the governor, but hope is never a plan.
We only have about 2 minutes left in our program, so let's talk briefly about data centers. Well, we know the expansion of artificial intelligence is driving the demand for data centers, and we know that the governor wants them to come here. However, he wants them to bring their own power supply. And so let's talk about what are the potential economic benefits, maybe about a minute to you, Bernie.
Sure. I'll just start that I think data centers are here. And so it's a conversation about how do we responsibly find a way to bring these into our community, and they reciprocate by providing a value add and not a detriment in terms of energy consumption, costs, water drawdowns, pollution, all the various elements that could accompany big industry being plopped down in the middle of communities. Those things need to be sorted out, and they are. There are proposals out there that are trying to find community benefit agreements that say, you do this and we'll do that, and that needs to be sorted out. So it still remains to be seen how this will shake out. However, they're here, so the best thing that we can do is do so responsibly.
Megan, I'll give the Commonwealth Foundation the last word, about a minute on data centers.
On data centers, sure. I appreciate that, Larry. What I would say is, you know, as Bernie said, data centers are here to stay, but we would like to see, I think that the most recent legislation that was introduced in the House seems to me almost like a de facto ban on data centers because it's so limiting in the sources of energy they can use. You can't use coal, you can't use natural gas, you can use nuclear, but it takes decades to build out the nuclear power infrastructure. So right now in Pennsylvania, we know that we are an amazing energy powerhouse, and so we should tap into that for the resources that are needed to run these data centers. And I think that it is going to be a debate that continues, and we will see what the lawmakers negotiate.
Our guests have been Bernie Gallagher from the Keystone Research Center and Megan Martin from the Commonwealth Foundation. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Larry.
PCN's Ellen Franz talked to Representative Marla Brown about her bill that would designate rye whiskey as the official state spirit.
Welcome to our program. You are introducing a bill to commemorate an official spirit of the Commonwealth. What would that be?
So, Pennsylvania rye whiskey. And a lot of people don't know that Pennsylvania is the birthplace of American rye whiskey. And this idea actually came to me from one of my local small business owners who owns a distillery. It's called Newcastle Union Station Craft Distillery. And he is he being David Goldberg, one of the owners, he's part of the PA Distillers Guild. And they were trying to come up with creative ways to showcase the industry. And what better way than to be able to market, Pennsylvania's own rye whiskey.
Now, Pennsylvania has a few other types of spirits that are based in the state. Why choose the rye whiskey specifically?
Well, we actually are known for the rye. The Germans and the Irish brought it over, and it was a very productive crop. It actually was very successful as a winter crop. So in terms of agriculture, it helped strengthen soil, reduce erosion, and supporting watershed restoration. So there's a lot of benefits to it aside from having something unique for the distillers to be marketing.
Why is it important to commemorate a state spirit?
Well, obviously, in this case, it's going to help support small business, which I'm all about. But I think it's also a unique opportunity, with it being the celebration of 250 years this year. We need to highlight things that make us unique, and this is one of those things that makes us very unique. And, there's so much opportunity for job growth as well, because the way the legislation reads, it must be 75% of the grain must be grown in Pennsylvania, and it must be mashed, fermented, distilled, aged, and bottled entirely within Pennsylvania. So throughout that entire process, there's a lot of job opportunity as well.
We've been speaking with Representative Marla Brown. Thank you for your time.
Thanks to Ellen for that interview. Before we go, here's a reminder about Governor Josh Shapiro visiting Erie to talk about his new memoir, Where We Keep the Light, Stories from a Life of Service. We'll show the governor this evening live at 6 o'clock. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Kasper. Thanks for watching.